And here we are. My name is Chris Black and coming to you live from WHO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, where we have been struggling against technology all morning to bring you this very special live event. I am here and we're going to be talking about the new guidelines on physical activity and sedentary behavior in the time of COVID. I'm so happy to see our guest, Juana Williamson. Thank you, Juana, for coming to us live from your house. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your work you do at WHO, and this important report that we've launched this recently.
Thanks, Chris. I think we're all facing those frustrations with internet connections and technical issues. Maybe that reflects that we've all moved to teleworking and facing some of those challenges. So my work continues even though I'm doing it from home. I'm a technical officer at WHO, and I've been involved in updating some guidelines we had from 2010 on physical activity. But this time we've added an extra element, which I think is really important for us all to think about at the moment, which is sedentary behavior, which maybe all this technical difficulty we've had is because we're being a little bit too sedentary at the moment.
Indeed. So what advice do you have for people who are struggling in these times to get enough physical activity in their day?
Yeah, Chris, physical activity is not just good for your physical health, for your heart, but it's also really good for your mind. And I think we've all faced challenges in terms of mental health and anxiety and maybe even symptoms of depression. We've been indoors all time, but physical activity has a load of benefits for your mental health, and it's really good at relieving stress. And being physically active is something that can be done even indoors. There are ways that we can all be physically active as part of our everyday living. We're not talking about just sport or exercise or going to a gym. There are lots of things that can be done even in and around the house to stay active and stay fit.
Is one that shows just every sort of different activity that we can do during the day. So even things like houseworking, house cleaning, and gardening, and cutting the lawn, does that count as physical activity?
All of those things count. You know, we say every move counts because you can be active whether you're sweeping the house, vacuuming, mopping the floors, walking up the stairs, making those little choices to take the stairs rather than take a lift or an elevator. Maybe it's going for a walk around the block. A brisk walk can get your heart beating a bit faster, you're breathing a bit faster, and those are all physical activities that count and contribute towards building better health for everybody.
Thank you so much, Juana. So as I was mentioning before, this is a live from WHO headquarters in Geneva. We're trying to come to you on all our platforms today, and we are struggling a little bit with some of them. So if you see the signal coming in and out, that is why. Especially on Periscope and Twitter, we're just trying to fix that feed. We're very happy to be live on TikTok today. TikTok, which also has a very special thing going on with the soundtrack to that video that we played at the beginning. So we really appreciating TikTok users who are doing all sorts of creative things with that great soundtrack to that video, which I have to say is one of my personal favorite videos of this year. And then I'm just getting my colleagues from our social media team telling me that we're finally in business on Twitter and Periscope. So if you are on that platform, hit us up with the hashtag AskWHO, and that will give us your questions. We would love to hear anything you would like to ask our expert, Juana Williamson, on physical activity. And also, if you could just tell us some stories about where you're watching from and how you are trying to keep fit in these tough times where many of us around the world do not have the opportunity to go outside and be active as much as we'd like to. Juana, I wonder if you could tell us, in terms of our guidelines, how much physical activity do we recommend in a day or in a week? What's a good way for people to understand this, what we're asking?
So For children and adolescents, we recommend that they get at least an average of an hour of physical activity a day. And this is for children aged 5 to 18 years of age. And again, I'll emphasize that hour can be an hour of play as well. It doesn't have to be sport or exercise, and you don't need to think of it as being physical education at school. So there's lots of different ways to get that hour of physical activity. For adults and older adults, it's between 150 and 300 minutes per week. So there, the recommendation is spread out over a week, and people can accumulate their physical activity, whether it's walking to the shops or cycling to work. There are lots of different ways that we can be physically active. On top of that, it's really important to use your muscles, the major muscles in the body. So on at least a week, both children and adults should be doing activities that really build muscle strength, and they're also really good for bone health too. And that bone health becomes really important in older adults. And older adults should add on at least 3 days a week the kind of activities that build balance, that help them maintain physical function, because those things are really important for preventing falls in older adults, which we know is a really big issue.
One thing we've talked about at the very beginning was sedentary behavior. What are the risks if people aren't moving, if people don't get enough exercise in a day?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear your question, but I think it's about sedentary behavior.
Exactly.
And sedentary behavior is quite a new field. There's been a lot of work over the last 5-10 years on sedentary behavior, and it's clear that it is bad for your heart. It's bad for your physical health. It's also associated with poorer sleep patterns, for example, in children. And so limiting sedentary behavior is the recommendation that we have put forward. Very difficult to say exactly how much sedentary behavior is too much. The evidence isn't there at the moment, but it's very clear that people who are more physically active and spend less time being sedentary, whether that's sitting at work or at school, or sitting and being very sedentary while you're enjoying leisure time, then that really has benefits for health and mental health throughout.
Indeed. So we're starting to get some questions from our audience. Thank you so much to everyone. From TikTok, people are asking about the length of time you need to be active in a day. And that's kind of a hard thing to judge, because it really would depend on the type of activity you're doing. If you're doing freeletics and CrossFit for 15 minutes, that's different from walking around your garden for 15 minutes. So length of time is probably not a good guideline, I would think. Is that correct?
Well, I think that there's a really interesting question there, actually. I'm glad somebody brought this up, because the previous guidelines we had at WHO in 2010 stated that physical activity needed to be done in bouts of at least 10 minutes for it to count, in a sense. It's clear now that we don't need to make that recommendation. And this is why we're saying every move counts, because it doesn't need to be at least 10 minutes long for it to start counting. Whatever moves you're doing, they all contribute to that recommendation of 150 to 300 minutes per week. So it's good to spread your physical activity out throughout the week rather than do it all in one day or all over the weekend. But there isn't a strict amount that needs to be done every single day. But certainly more is better. And if you're incorporating it into your everyday life and habits throughout the week, that's a really good way to stay physically active.
I remember when I first started doing lots of running. I'm a runner. It wasn't until I really got it part of my daily routine and my weekly routine that it really started to make a difference, because it's so easy to skip something when it's not part of your routine. And once you really get it into your plans for every day and for a weekly schedule, it makes such a difference. So we're wondering, we have a lot of viewers who are asking us, what are the actual benefits? I'm wondering if you go into a little more detail on the benefits for our bodies in terms of regular physical activity.
Well, there are benefits for hearts, bodies, and minds. So it's really good for heart health, for cardiovascular health. It's good at preventing and also managing things like hypertension and type 2 diabetes. It's also very good for mental health, and that's really broadly. So it's It's good at preventing symptoms of anxiety and depression. Physical activity has also got cognitive benefits. So where children who are more physically active perform better at school in terms of, but also adults who stay physically active can reduce the chances of developing things like dementia and cognitive decline. So it's got benefits at both ends of the life.
So benefits for both our physical health and our mental health. Thank you so much, Juana. So please, again, if you have any questions for our expert, don't hesitate to put them in the comments box on any of our platforms. We're live on TikTok, Facebook, Periscope, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, LinkedIn today. And as you can tell, we're struggling a little bit with the technology. So please bear with us if we have any glitches and any sound problems. It's how it is today. It's one of those days here across the internet, but we're going to do our best because this is an important issue and we are so happy to be with you today. So another question for you is, in terms of COVID-19, some specific challenges there. Let's say we have both people who can't be moving around physically as much as perhaps they would like. And we have many group activities which have been canceled. We have less probably physical activity in schools, I would think, if schools are open. And then we have a lot of people asking questions about, do I need to wear a mask when I'm doing physical activity? So why don't we take those questions one by one, starting with the last one. Do you need to wear a mask when you're doing physical activity with other people?
So in many countries, as you said, gyms and sports clubs are closed and any team sports have been suspended because it's difficult to maintain physical distancing when you're playing as part of a team. If you're doing individual physical activity, whether it's at home or walking or running in the park, for example, you don't need to wear a mask if you can maintain physical distance from others, or if you're just doing that activity with the people within your household that you share a house with. But we should all maintain that physical distance rather than engage in activities with people that we don't live with, physical activity. But it's not advised to wear a mask while you're doing vigorous physical activity. So there, really, the important issue is maintaining distance.
And thank you. And then in terms of access to sports, so should people be doing more activities in their house, or if they can get outside safely by themselves, they should do something like that within following the guidelines of their local and national authorities, of course.
Absolutely. And I think that there it really depends on what the restrictions or the guidelines are in the place where you're living. So if there's a chance to get outside, it's always good to get a bit of fresh air and go for a walk. It will relieve a lot of those stresses that sometimes build in at home. Some of us live in really restricted spaces, so space indoors to be physically active may be really limited. But it's been amazing what many of the sports clubs and sports providers have done in order to bring those physical activity opportunities into the home. So there've been some really great initiatives where people have put lessons and club activities online so that everybody can take part. And I think that's been one of the great things to come out of the restrictions that we've all had to live through, that we've had some really great schemes sharing those opportunities and sharing that, even that social interaction that we get by engaging in physical activity with other people. So it's trying to keep those two aspects of some of those exercise or sport opportunities that we engage in, not just for our health and our fitness, but also to meet other people, share an experience with other people. So those online offerings are absolutely fantastic. We should, though, recognize recognized having some interesting schemes using radio or using TV as ways of engaging people with physical activity where maybe their internet access isn't so great, or if they're having internet problems, a little bit like we are today.
Indeed. Indeed. Speaking of communities and different partner organizations around the world, how does WHO work with organizations like that, for example, in developing these guidelines or perhaps in promoting them like we're doing today?
Sorry, Chris, I didn't quite hear that question. Could you repeat that?
Sorry, Juana. And we're just wondering about, in terms of working with partner organizations around the world, did they input into our guidelines, and do we work with them closely in terms of disseminating information on these new guidelines?
So when WHO developed guidelines, we have quite a rigorous process to review the scientific evidence. But we also engaged very deliberately with a much broader set of stakeholders. We had an online consultation where we had feedback from both members of the public, but also various different organizations, both sporting organizations and organizations that supported some of those subpopulations that we specifically made recommendations for this time. So we have recommendations for people living with chronic diseases, and those are cancer survivors, people living with hypertension, people living with type 2 diabetes or with HIV. And we also have special recommendations for children, adolescents, and adults living with disability. And some of those stakeholder groups engaged really actively in the guideline development process, which is great to see because we know that many of these people face particular barriers in accessing physical activity. And that's what we have to tackle. Having the guidelines is one thing, but implementing them in order to support people to be more physically active is a whole other set of work that needs to be done. And some of those other stakeholder groups are going to be really important in taking that work forward to that next step.
Thank you for that information. You mentioned different age groups. In terms of adults and older adults, is there any specific recommendations in these guidelines?
As I mentioned earlier, for older adults, there is an additional recommendation to incorporate multi-component activities. That can be a variety of different activities, but they're ones that really challenge your balance and that train physical function. And the emphasis on those is really to help older adults prevent falls, but also keep some of their physical function going, which is so important for their health and for their independence as they get older. Those activities can be done either as part of a group or individually, but again, they're a really important part of the recommendations. For adults, the recommendations are to be physically active for 150 to 300 minutes a day, but also to incorporate activities that strengthen muscle, because we've seen from the evidence that the combination of those two is actually the ones that give the best health outcomes.
Thank you so much. We're getting lots and lots of questions, so I'm going to ask you a few more from our audience, if that's okay for you. People are asking about chronic diseases like diabetes. Maybe we could look at a little bit about the importance of physical activity in preventing that. And then if you could also talk a little bit about if we have any guidelines for people who have diabetes in terms of their physical activity.
Those are really good questions because we know that physical activity can have a really important role, not just in preventing some of those chronic diseases like diabetes or hypertension, but actually helping people to manage them. In addition to any medication that somebody may be receiving, if they are physically active, they're going to improve their health and well-being and may even be able to reduce medications as time goes on. Obviously, those are decisions to take with their healthcare provider, but it can be part of their whole management program. So for these recommendations and these guidelines, we looked really specifically at the evidence available on physical activity in people already living with type 2 diabetes. So we're not extrapolating, we're looking directly at that particular group. And there is good evidence that physical activity can help manage the symptoms. It can help prevent disease progression, so people getting worse. And it has a number of health benefits very broadly in that group. And that's why we made a special set of recommendations for people living with chronic diseases. They're actually the same in the end.
Oh, it looks like we were losing our connection to you, Juana.
Has benefits in each of these chronic condition groups as well.
Perfect. We lost, at least on my side, I lost you for a few minutes there. I hope our audience could see you. One question I was wondering about is, and wondering if you looked at in the guidelines, is the interrelation between nutrition and physical activity. Is that something that you guys looked into, or is that something that is really for another area to look into?
We certainly looked at the impact of physical activity on adiposity, so on body weight. The evidence there is quite mixed. It's quite difficult to pull apart. There's certainly an association between people who are more physically active managing their weight better, but it is quite a complex set of information. Where we looked at it very carefully was for people living with HIV, because there had been some concern that there might be a negative impact on their body mass index, their muscle mass, and their body weight, which is something that is often associated with HIV. And then we activity and body mass.
Thank you so much. So again, if you're joining us a little bit late into our show, we're looking today at physical activity and sedentary behavior based on some new guidelines released recently by WHO with an expert working here in headquarters, Dr. Juana Williamson. We're struggling a little bit with the technology today, so thank you so much for bearing with us, and thank you if the audio is coming in and out on your side, which it is for me a little bit. So please do bear with us, because this is an important subject, and we do appreciate you joining us today. We do appreciate your questions. I'm wondering if you could just summarize a little bit for us what's new in our guidelines, and basically what should people be doing to stay active in these COVID times that we're all living through?
So certainly one of the really new things in these guidelines are the recommendations to limit sedentary behavior. It's the first time that WHO has made recommendations, and the evidence also shows us that people who are very sedentary in their lifestyle can benefit by being even more physically active. So by replacing that sedentary time with more moderate to vigorous physical activity. That's anything from brisk walking to or cycling fast or swimming fast. So those can counter some of the detrimental health effects of being very sedentary. The other new recommendations are for these specific population groups that we were talking about, and one that we haven't touched on yet is the recommendation for pregnant women and women postpartum, so just after delivery. There was some concern that physical activity might not be appropriate for women during pregnancy, but having looked at the evidence, we are recommending that pregnant women do 150 minutes per week of physical activity, and those who've been really active before they were pregnant, active during pregnancy and postpartum, so long as there are no medical contraindications. So obviously they need to be under the care of a healthcare provider who's supporting them through their pregnancy. And we see that has a benefit, not just in terms of the mother's health, but also the baby's health. So those babies are less likely to be born with delivery complications or high birth weight or low birth weight. And it carries through to postpartum and actually prevents postpartum depression for many women. So it has benefit. Body.
Thank you so much. We're getting a few questions about asthma, children who have asthma. Do we have any guidelines or recommendations for them to do physical activity, considering the problems they might have breathing?
sorry, Chris, I didn't quite hear that question again. That was
It's
a
the problem.
question.
The problem relates to children with asthma. Do we have any specific guidelines for them in terms of challenges they might face for getting some physical activity?
Yeah, we weren't able to look exclusively at children who suffer from asthma. That's a really important chronic condition, and obviously can be of great concern, particularly with physical activity. But I think one of our recommendations that when people are not currently meeting these guidelines and these recommendations, not to be put off and feel that it's something that you would never be able to achieve. What's much more important is to start small and build up gradually. So even for children who suffer from asthma or children or adults who have other conditions, just starting gently to be more physically active throughout your day and your week and incorporating it into your life in the ways that we've described. You know, it can be anything from a 10-minute walk a day, maybe getting off the bus one stop earlier and walking home instead. Those little actions can make it, and it's a great way to start slowly and gently and build up towards the recommendations.
That's great advice. I myself, when I started about 10 years ago running, like I mentioned before, bit by bit, slowly by slowly, adding a few minutes every day and going a little bit longer, and also being motivated by running with great friends and community groups, really had an incredible impact on my life and my physical and mental well-being. I lost, I think, 26 kilos or something over a couple of years.
Wow.
And I know my mental health really improved thanks to this physical activity. So I'm a believer in this, and I'm so glad that you've been able to tell our audience a little bit about it today. I'm wondering if they'd like to get more information, where should they go?
So on our website, you'll find links to all the documents that we've produced. There's a brief version of the guidelines that's available in all 6 UN languages. We also have a more detailed scientific document for anybody who's interested in that. In addition, there were a number of scientific papers published in journals at the same time. And we have a number of different resources and social media resources, which we're very keen for people to share as well. And again, links are available through our website for those.
Indeed. And again, an important message that you mentioned earlier is that these guidelines and our advice is really for people of all ages, from very young to very old. There's always something that can be done, and people can move more. And like you said, every move counts. And it's also around the world. This is really a global issue. There's no region that shouldn't be doing less physical activity. Everyone should do a little bit more. Speaking of that, we've had viewers watching today from all around the world: Cameroon, USA, Jamaica, Senegal, South Korea, Zimbabwe, Turkey, United Kingdom, Zambia, India, Germany, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Armenia, Kenya, Philippines, France, Brazil, Greece, Angola, Nigeria, Egypt, Benin, Denmark, Iran, Oman, the Gambia, Indonesia, Canada, Iraq, Eswatini. And I'm Chris Black, and I'm here in Switzerland, where we've been struggling with the internet today. And I'm wondering if, Juana, if you could give us some last thoughts on this important subject. And then my colleague Mark, afterwards, he's going to roll this excellent video that we showed at the beginning, which really shows everyone the importance of every move counts. Although I have something important to talk about in terms of TikTok for that. But first, over to you, Juana, for your last thoughts, please.
Chris, I love that list of countries that you read out who are listening to us or watching. It's great to think that every move counts, but it also counts across the world. So as you said, you know, these guidelines are for everybody of any ability, any age, and making even those small changes are already going to bring benefits to your health. So I hope we can get the whole world moving.
Thank you.
And really get everyone on board being more physically active and doing something for themselves.
Indeed, indeed. That's the main message for us today. And so, as I mentioned, if you've been watching us on Facebook or Twitter or Periscope or LinkedIn or YouTube, Please continue to put your comments in the comment box and our experts will get back to you. A special shout out to our TikTok users today. We really do appreciate you joining us. And we're hoping that you've noticed the hashtag Be Active campaign, where we're asking TikTokers to make little videos showing us your favorite physical activity. And you can actually use the WHO hashtag Be Active soundtrack in these videos. And then you can see this little video that we're showing at the end to inspire you. And you can really show your friends and show your community and show your leaders and show the world that every move does count. So Juana, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for sticking through our technical glitches that we had. I'm so glad we could make it work, though, because as I mentioned before, this is an important issue. Thank you again, and hopefully you can join us soon on another social media live here from WHO with less technical problems than today. Thanks to the team behind the scenes here as well for making this happen. Mark, if you could roll the video now, and see everyone later.